I love voice acting. It's not something that I think I will be incredible at least for now, but ever since I was a child, I was obsessed with identifying voice actors. I could be watching a movie in Spanish that featured Jim Carrey, and then I will think to myself, wait a minute, that's Goku! That's Goku from Dragon Ball! What the hell is going on here? This is no exception to video games. Whether it be Spanish, English, or Japanese, voice acting is something I'm very passionate about. I get a kick out of identifying voice actors, enjoy their performances, and see how they can bring life to my favorite characters. So, have you ever been curious on how other languages translate to gaming and other mediums? Well, I don't claim to be an expert on the subject, but as someone who likes to juggle between 3 different languages, I can tell you my own personal experiences with it. Obviously, as someone from Mexico, I tend to support the Latin American dubs more often than not. However, that is only if the video game gives me the option in the first place. Yeah, believe it or not, despite being one of the most spoken languages in the world, not many video games tend to offer translations and even less dubs for Latinos. Well, yes and no. It's a bit complicated. If you go to any game and check the language option, there's a high chance that at the bare minimum, you'll find the option to change all of the text to Spanish, with sometimes even having the option of a dub. But there's a slight problem. It's Spanish from Spain. This has always bothered the hell out of me. Whenever a video game has a Spanish dub, it's done with voice actors from Spain, and I don't get it. Latin America has a higher number of people who speak the language, so why is Spain usually the one who does the voices for video games? It's so strange because that doesn't happen with shows or movies, but it's very common with video games. Like, I know it's not easy to dub an entire game, but maybe it's cheaper to distribute that way? I don't know, it's just so weird. Anyway, let's get something out of the way. Latin American Spanish and Spain Spanish, which I'll refer to as Castellano from now on, are 2 completely different beasts. You could kinda compare them to American English and British English, but I find that the gap between these 2 dialects is wider, and I'm gonna be real honest with you. I don't like translations in Castellano. Like, I actually have a fun story about that. When I was a kid, I disliked dubs from Spain so much that I will always revert the games back to English. That in turn allowed me to get much better at learning the language, but yeah, no Spanish at all. But why is that? Are the dubs really that terrible? You know, in the past I would have said yes, but now I have a better answer. They're not for me. Like, I could look at them and say, oh man, these guys from Spain sound bored out of their minds and put no emotion in their roles. But no, they're simply not made with Latin American people in mind. It's exactly that of why I say the gap between East and West is wider when it comes to this language. That's why so many shows and movies will offer you the option between Latino Spanish and Castellano, because we are completely different audiences, and it's very important to recognize that. I don't think it's fair for one country to take away the merit of the other just because they are not the target audience. Both can have great talent, amazing direction, but also make their own stupid decisions. And at the end of the day, if they achieve their purpose and people can enjoy them, then why throw knives at each other, you know? Castellano dubs are just an option, and no doubt many Latinos still use them to understand their games better. And hey, even I have enjoyed a few Castellano dubs from time to time, like the Assassin's Creed series. Back when I used to enjoy these games, I played all of them up to 3 in Castellano, and they had so many iconic lines that my friends and I will repeat at school at all times. So yeah, the bottom line is, just because the dub is from a different region, it doesn't inherently mean it's terrible. You're just not the audience. Actually, if you care, we even tend to have these discussions within Latin American dubs. Because remember, Latinos are not just Mexico. You also have Chile, Ecuador, Argentina, Venezuela, etc, etc. All of them with their own lingo. And there's a lot of media out there with more Mexicanized dialogue, you could say. You know, like making their own jokes, changing the dialogue to be more like how we talk, and even referencing things within our culture.
Para denunciar los males de la verdad y el amor.
Y extender nuestro reino hasta la vecindad del Chavo.
Even those tend to be criticized by people who are not from Mexico. They can find them obnoxious, often preferring to have a dub that is more loyal to the source material and remains more neutral in the Spanish. I understand the criticism, especially if you're not from the country, but I think that these liberties can sometimes enhance a product. For example, rom-coms. You will never, ever catch me watching any of this anime. Unless you show me a clip with Mexicanized dialogue and I'll actually like it. It turns out that if you adapt jokes from a different culture into your own culture, they can actually be funny. But again, that's just me. There can also be dubs with amazing neutral Spanish. Like SpongeBob. Everybody loves Bob Esponja in Spanish. Venezuela really cooked with that dub. I just wanted to show you that even within Latin America, there tends to be a lot of conflict when it comes to Latin American dubs. Kinda similar like how in English, people have those "I don't want a localization, I want a translation" arguments all the time. Not as stupid if you ask me, but it's a close comparison. Okay, so where do video games fall in here? Well, I'll say, whenever a game gives me the option, I will support the Latino voice actors no matter what. And I want to say that most of the dubs tend to be very neutral. I don't think I've ever played a game in Latin American Spanish that is super Mexicanized. Will I like it? Yeah, sure, but just the sole fact that I can play a game in a language that hits close to home is incredible. For me, one of the most magical aspects about this is how they can adapt my favorite characters into my native tongue, but also bring life to new ones. It's especially cool when I have a point of comparison on games I played more than once, and they all can vary in quality. Dead Rising 3? English. English all the way! The voices in Spanish are good, but I find the direction very lacking, and they sometimes use expressions nobody else uses in Latin America. It's like they directly translated the English dialogue. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild? Surprisingly, Spanish, no question about it! In part because the English dub was already considered lame by many, but the Spanish voice actors are very damn good, so that really helps a lot. Gears of War? I'm sorry, but I can't imagine playing this on anything but Spanish. These are actually the first ever games I played in Latino, and I was blown away with how good they were. These voices are so damn iconic to me. And the voice actors did such a stellar performance that they even got me crying in some of the game's most emotional moments. Simply marvelous. But as I said earlier, that's not something I tend to see very often. So when a game shows that they'll be Latino, those are actually news that make me very excited. So how often do I get a game that lets me play it in Spanish? There are a few patterns that I've noticed. For example, Sony's movie games, or any Western AAA company usually tend to deliver in the Latino department. But curiously, not a lot of Japanese games receive this treatment. So when they do get a Latino dub, that actually feels like a miracle. In Nintendo's case, not only was it surprising to hear Zelda Breath of the Wild was gonna have voice acting, but also in Latino, I was not expecting that, and it's even better than in English. That is insane! The WarioWare series also have fully acted cutscenes, and they care enough to give them the Latino treatment. It's so small, but I really appreciate it. Although there's something strange here. In WarioWare Get It Together, they care enough to translate Penny's theme in Spanish, but they never put that song in the game. The only way you're ever listening to this song is by going to Nintendo's official YouTube channel where they uploaded it, so... what? What the hell? There's other Nintendo games that have also been getting the Latino treatment, like Kirby and the Forgotten Land, the Mario spin-offs, and even Metroid Dread. Although that's mostly reserved for background voices, announcers, or in the latter's case, a robot voice. But just the sole fact that they care enough to dub these small things is something I really appreciate. And really, sometimes all you really need are those small details. You don't need to have an entire dub just to impress me. Sometimes all you have to do is show that you care enough about doing a good Latino representation. For example, recently I played Saints Row 1 for the first time and replayed Saints Row 2 for the third time. And something that really stuck with me is how superb the voice acting in these games is. But obviously, my favorite part is how accurate the Latino dialogue is. Hispanic pedestrians will insult you in Spanish. The accents while they speak English is on point.
Did you hear that? That asshole thinks he's a... Shit!
There's an entire gang in the first game comprised of Latinos called the Los Carnales.
It's not the Los Carnales, it's just the Carnales. Los means... fuck it. Like I was saying...
And one of my favorite parts is that whenever any of these Hispanic characters speak Spanish, the game doesn't even bother to explain to you what they're saying. They just put some subtitles that say, speaks in Spanish, and that's it. But as someone who can't fully understand them...
¿Pero qué pasó?
What is it?
¡Coño, ese cabrón, hijo de puta!
They're really damn good, seriously! They could have gotten away with some terrible washed-out Spanish, but no! They made it accurate and made it feel very natural, even though the entire game is in English. It's so cool, and it made me so happy. Every single Hispanic person who lent their voice to these games deserves an award because it is so good. Except the guy who voices Hispanic player in the first game.
Yo, can you speed this shit up? I wanna go to Freckle Bitches.
But okay, one last thing I want to bring up. It's expected for an American or a Japanese product to reach third world countries and get a translation. But what about the exact opposite? Is there an example of a Mexican product that left the country and was even localized for a different audience? And actually, yes, there is something. El Chavo del Ocho video games, El Chavo Wii and El Chavo Kart. Video games made by a Mexican studio based on the cartoon based on the Mexican sitcom El Chavo del Ocho. I've gone on a record to talk about how much this show means to me. But long story short, it's a cultural icon that more than 50 years later remains in the hearts of many Latinos. Well, as expected, its video games come with the original Mexican cast from the cartoon, and they all do an incredible job as always. But what I didn't know before I reviewed these games in 2018 is that they dubbed them in English and the games give you the option to listen to those voices. This was a shock to me because El Chavo del Ocho is the show that defines Mexico. I spent all of my life listening to it in Spanish. And Portuguese, since it's also extremely popular in Brazil. So knowing that it got an English dub, I just couldn't believe it! And not just that, it's not cheaply made, it even has some big name voice actors like Yuri Lowenthal as Ñoño and Tara Platt as Patty, like... what?!
My dad gave me a whole bunch of money, and I'm gonna buy candy at the store, and you can't have any!
But you know, it was pretty cool. El Chavo is a comedy that relies a lot on Spanish wordplay, so it was very fascinating seeing how they adapted many names and jokes into English, like Señor Barriga, the guy who is known for being fat and his name reflects that. How do you change that? Well, calling Mr. Beliarge. Don Ramon? There's no joke here, so do you keep it or change it? His name is now Mr. Raymond, the English version of Ramon. La Popis? That's a nickname, there's no translation for that. So what do you do here? Well, Thief sounds kinda similar, so that's her new name. How do you translate iconic phrases like fue sin querer queriendo into English? What they did was say, did it on purpose, but I didn't mean to. That does make sense, actually. It's so awesome. It reminds me a lot of what Latin America did in the past with certain characters. Did you know Mickey Mouse used to be called El Ratón Miguelito in Latin America way before I was born? Yeah, translating names was super common back in the day. Anyway, the point of this section was to tell you once again that El Chavo Kart is ironically a great racing game that you should play if you ever get the chance. And it comes in English too. Sorry for nerding out a lot, but I just really like voice acting. There was no other purpose for this video other than to talk about how happy great Latino dubs make me, and of course, to show you guys how different these things tend to be in other countries. But now, it's your turn. Which dubs are your favorites? It doesn't necessarily have to be in Spanish, it can be an English dub, a Portuguese dub, Italian, French, anything goes so long as it's special to you. Actually, do you think people in Japan look at American shows and argue if dubs or subs are better, same way American fans argue over anime? That is some food for thought. But anyway, let me know in the comments, and while you do that, thank you so much for your time, I really hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to support the channel, you know you can do so by liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing, and Patreon. Anything helps. Have a wonderful day, and take care! I'll see you next time!